Cyberpunk 2077 is a world of broken loyalties, deep psychological scars, and morally murky paths. Solomon Reed embodies these elements quite fully. In the Phantom Liberty DLC, he is a super spy whose loyalty and dedication have defined his existence. Reed, a servant of the new United States of America, is a complex and often conflicted figure who's given everything to his missions, even as it continues to cost him deeply. In this psychoanalysis, we unravel the many layers of Reed's psyche, examining what drives him, how he navigates betrayal and resilience, and the impact of his relationships. And by the end, we'll contrast his character with another cyberpunk icon, Johnny Silverhand, showing how these two figures handle the game's harsh and unforgiving world in completely opposing ways. Hey, you enjoy psychoanalysis and story-explained content for video games? Be a chum and hit that subscribe and like button. Our introduction to Solomon Reed happens when V, the protagonist, is thrusted into a covert mission to protect President Myers of the NUSA. Reed, who's been hiding as a sleeper agent for 7 years, emerges to lead the high-stakes operation. Reed projects a carefully crafted militant exterior, one defined by control, professionalism, and a dedication to the mission. There's something profoundly personal about his commitment, as though his entire identity has been forged through his loyalty to duty. As the story progresses, Reed reveals himself to be a figure defined by a multi-layered tension between his loyalty to the nation and the moral weight of his decisions. He is a man bound to the call of duty, no matter the personal cost. At his core, Reed's unwavering commitment isn't just part of his job, it is his sense of self. To understand this psychological foundation, we can take a look at identity foreclosure, a concept developmental psychologist James Marcia developed based on Erik Erikson's work on identity formation. Marcia describes identity foreclosure as a state where a person commits to a particular role or belief system without exploring other possibilities or questioning its validity. Often, individuals in this state are deeply influenced by external pressures or expectations and adopt these imposed values as their own. For Reed, this concept is fully realized in his devotion to the NUSA. He's so bound to his role as an agent that he doesn't seem to exist outside of it. Reed doesn't merely see his career as part of his life. His entire sense of worth and purpose is enmeshed in this role. And this is particularly evident in the way that Reed rationalizes his actions as he sacrifices for the greater good. He views his mission as something larger than himself, and this belief structure has insulated him from questioning the moral ambiguity of his actions.
What in the fuck?
Targets neutralized.
Fuck, you wiped them.
What'd you think we'd do? Bind their hands with duct tape, shove socks in their mouths, and wait for them to wriggle free and call for help? This ain't no game, V. It's a simple choice. Them or us. I chose us.
It's a game. Your fucking spy game they weren't playing. They were innocent.
That's not quite how I describe two pro-criminals. These innocents, as you call them, wouldn't hesitate to rob you for everything you've got, or put a bullet in your back.
Before working directly for President Myers, Reed was military spec ops. Naturally, within that line of work, repeated exposure to violence, such as killing, has made him desensitized to the act. This emotional numbing involves psychological mechanisms that help individuals cope with extreme acts that might otherwise cause intense emotional distress. Sigmund Freud's concept of repetition compulsion describes a drive to repeat certain behaviors, even traumatic or distressing ones, as a way of processing unresolved conflict or trauma. For someone who frequently engages in acts of violence, the repeated exposure can dull their emotions, creating a cycle where the initial shock and guilt associated with killing or violence are greatly diminished. By constantly reliving or reenacting traumatic situations, individuals often grow detached from the emotional impact, which ultimately leads to a desensitization. Reed is often forced into morally questionable situations, the personal toll of which he rarely confronts due to his unyielding sense of duty. It's his form of identity foreclosure. Take for an example blackmailing and recruiting So-Mi into a life of covert operations.
Understand this. I'm the one chance of keeping you safe. Your friends. For sure. Let them get hurt.
Blackmail? That your play? Don't know me enough.
Nothing you'll regret. Besides, I'll be right beside you. Always. I promise.
2 questions.
Shoot.
You regret it? Like, ever?
Once. A long while back. Decided then and there I'd never regret it again.
And just like many things in his life, Reed would come to regret roping her into this life.
Today, or 7 years ago, don't know what exact point I fucked up. The end result's that now we're here while she could die. I just pray that she's the one we're saving. The So-Mi I knew, and not some...
And even when regret is blatantly staring him in the face, Reed holds ironclad to the plan, never entertaining other potential avenues, rationalizing all of these sacrifices as necessary. His loyalty serves as both his anchor and chain, binding him to the NUSA even as his choices lead him further into ethically gray territory where his personal values are constantly tested. Near the end of Phantom Liberty, the player is given a choice to kill So-Mi or to quote-unquote save her, handing her over to the NUSA. Now, she would technically still be alive, but would be condemned to a fate worse than death, likely to be used as a tool for the NUSA.
I tried on my own. Don't have the strength. Please. End it.
Reed, despite knowing deep inside what would happen, still delivered her from freedom.
Seems like you saved my life. She doesn't believe it. I can hear she doesn't believe it.
V would probe him about it later on, and just look at Idris Elba's facial expressions and pay attention to his responses as he tries to convince himself that he is justified in condemning So-Mi.
So Song had it right all along. Myers will never let her walk free, will she? Lose her only point of access to the block wall.
What's important to me is that she's alive.
Why? For what price or purpose? If you can't reverse the erosion of her psyche, if she can't go back to being her old self, then what have we done, Reed?
We helped her is what? As long as she's alive, there's hope.
What if... Reed, what if the best option was to let her die?
You know, I envy your ease. The ability to second-guess everything you've done. Your habit of doing so.
Try it sometime. Might discover something wonderful about it. Man, you hate this gig. But your head's so far up Washington's ass that you don't see it.
What else is wrong with me? Stockholm Syndrome?
Funny you should ask. Back in 1973, in Stockholm, Sweden, there was a bank robbery. Hostages taken during the 6-day standoff developed strong emotional bonds with their captors and later refused to testify against them in court. Criminologist and psychiatrist Nils Bejerot, who assisted the police during the standoff, first used the term Stockholm Syndrome to describe this unexpected bonding between captor and captive. Stockholm Syndrome is a psychological phenomenon where hostages or victims develop positive feelings, empathy, or even loyalty towards their captors, sometimes to the extent of defending or helping them. Reed's relationship with the NUSA can be understood as a form of Stockholm Syndrome.
So she omitted the fact that Arasaka tried to smoke me. And that I ended up in intensive care with 3 bullet holes. That 6 months had passed before I could take a shit on my own.
Huh. Might have slipped her mind.
Convenient. Well, now you know.
The NUS issued his death sentence, yet he serves the country to this day, clinging to something that's lost all meaning to me.
Funny. Out of everyone, it was Songbird they asked to pull the trigger.
Wait,
Yeah.
pull the trigger as in literally took out her iron and shot you.
Not personally, but she unlocked the door for those who came and did.
Despite facing repeated betrayal by the organization, Reed's attachment seems to only grow stronger, almost as if each act of disloyalty and abuse intensifies his commitment. Reed is repeatedly screwed over by the corporation he serves. Reed has shown time and time again without fail that the NUSA sees him as expendable, a means to an end. He's forced into near impossible situations, left behind on his own by the government, and even betrayed when his death became a bargaining chip. Yet, instead of rebelling, he rationalizes these actions as part of the job, and doubles down on his loyalty. It's a psychological paradox. Reed finds purpose and self-identity in his duty, but that duty is his prison. Pain deepens devotion, and the deeper his loyalty runs, the more he is willing to look the other way whenever they exploit him. He can no longer separate his identity from his role as their agent. In this sense, Reed's loyalty isn't just about duty, it's a form of psychological dependency. In the 1950s, American social psychologist Leon Festinger originated the theory of cognitive dissonance. This theory posits that people feel mental discomfort when they hold two opposing beliefs or values. This tension creates a psychological strain that people instinctively want to alleviate, often by justifying or modifying their behaviors or beliefs. Reed faces a near constant struggle with cognitive dissonance. Throughout Phantom Liberty, we see this dissonance in how Reed navigates the morally ambiguous actions demanded by his role. For example, Reed manipulates allies and puts innocents at risk, all to uphold the mission's objectives. By way of cognitive dissonance, Reed is able to essentially maintain his loyalty to the NUSA without collapsing under the weight of his guilt. Interestingly enough, Reed's cognitive dissonance doesn't lead to genuine self-reflection or a reevaluation of his loyalty. Instead, he uses his loyalty as a buffer against self-doubt, reinforcing his commitment rather than confronting his conflicting feelings.
You know, I envy your ease. The ability to second-guess everything you've done. Your habit of doing so.
Try it sometime. Might discover something wonderful about it.
I spent 7 years on what-ifs and coulda, shoulda, wouldas. I think that's enough.
Just locks himself in his psychological prison, rationalizing his actions without ever questioning the foundation of his loyalty. At one point in the game, Johnny Silverhand would even acknowledge Solomon Reed as an idealist, somebody who is very much like Johnny Silverhand, just the other side of the coin. Unlike Reed, Johnny ignores cognitive dissonance altogether by rejecting the institutional structures that cause it. Johnny's outright disdain for authority gives him a straightforward view of the world where his choices align with his values. Johnny has no need to justify his actions to any institution or authority, freeing him from the moral ambiguity that Reed never escapes. This fundamental difference in how they approach the world shows why Reed remains trapped in his psychological struggle while Johnny embraces a life of unapologetic autonomy, at least until he becomes an engram. Reed's relationship with Songbird reveals a rare glimpse into the emotional cost of his loyalty, highlighting how deeply bound he is to his duty. Reed's bond with her is complex. She wasn't just another operative, she was actually Reed's protege, personally recruited and mentored by him. Reed saw potential in her abilities as a netrunner, and even though they started off rocky, their relationship evolved into one out of mutual respect and reliance, with Reed feeling a deep sense of responsibility for her well-being. Somi represented Reed's desire to protect, and in a way, she brought out a more compassionate side in him, highlighting his ability to care deeply for those he leads. This relationship is a rare, almost parental connection in a life otherwise marked by professional detachment. In Phantom Liberty, Somi becomes a mirror reflecting Reed's own struggles with loyalty and moral compromise. According to Rollo May's existential psychology, meaningful relationships push us to confront our values, often challenging us to reevaluate who we are. Somi represents Reed's conflict between duty and personal loyalty, forcing him to question whether his dedication to the NUSA is truly worth the sacrifices he's made. Despite Somi showing disdain for Reed at times and even betraying him, she still cares for him, and Reed still maintains loyalty to her. By the end, he's challenged with who he's going to be most loyal to: the girl he forced into this life and who now just wants to escape and live free, or to the nation who constantly exploits him. Reed uses rationalization as copium for both the traumas self-inflicted and those imposed upon him equally. This narrative prevents him from truly processing his guilt or questioning his loyalty. Johnny Silverhand, on the other hand, channels his trauma outwards, using projection rather than rationalization to manage his feelings. Unlike Reed, who internalizes his struggles, Johnny projects his distrust and resentment onto others, especially those aligned with authority, and specifically individuals like Reed, who represent institutions he despises. Reed's approach to responsibility is unique and speaks to a deep-rooted need to prove his worth, often at his own detriment. This tendency can be examined through Alfred Adler's theory of individual psychology, specifically Adler's concept of the Inferiority Complex. According to Adler, individuals who perceive themselves as inadequate or unworthy often take on excessive responsibility, hoping to counterbalance those feelings by demonstrating their value through acts of sacrifice and dedication. However, part of me also thinks that Reed is trying to overcompensate for his failures, as he seems like the type of guy to be his harshest self-critic, accepting only perfection and nothing less. This self-perception can lead to great things, of course, but they can also lead to terrible things alike. In Reed's case, this complex manifests as an almost obsessive need to take control of everything. He doesn't just see himself as responsible for his actions, he internalizes the entire mission's success or failure as a measure of his own worth. This need for self-validation through achievement and responsibility is why Reed is so reluctant to delegate, even when sharing the load might ease his burden. To him, any failure reflects not just the lapse in his judgment but a deficiency in his character. This is also why he refuses to talk about his emotions, because as a man, in his eyes, if he can't solve his own issues by himself, he feels inferior and loses the respect that he has for himself. Sometimes it really is us keeping ourselves down. Throughout Phantom Liberty, we see Reed repeatedly shoulder the mission's most challenging tasks and emotionally taxing moments, often to his own downfall. His inability to share these responsibilities isolates him, creating an emotional wall between him and others, even those he cares about. Reed's reflexive response is to keep his burdens to himself, believing that he, and he alone, must endure the weight and responsibility of duty. This self-imposed isolation becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. The more Reed takes on, the more he proves his worth, but it also intensifies his belief that only he alone can handle the mission's complexities. His loyalty, therefore, becomes not just a duty but a means of asserting his value. This approach is both empowering and imprisoning. It gives him a sense of control, yet it traps him in a role that constantly demands more than he can give, feeding into his need for validation without ever allowing himself to fully satisfy it. Reed's career as an NUSA agent has been punctuated by betrayal, and no period illustrates this more vividly than his experience during the Unification War. As the leader of an FIA cell operating in Night City, Reed was responsible for a team that included Alex, Somi, and others conducting covert operations against the Arasaka Corporation. However, the harsh realities of warfare gradually eroded his team, with members being eliminated one by one. By the end, Reed's team was a shadow of its former self, a lonely reminder of what loyalty to the NUSA had cost him. One of Reed's most significant betrayals during this time came from within his own ranks. Jonas Collinson, a younger agent, made reckless decisions to try and impress Reed, decisions that led to disastrous consequences. Reed's sense of responsibility made this betrayal all the more bitter, as he was forced to confront not only his own loyalty, but the misguided loyalty of those he led. Despite his anger, Reed still ensured Jonas's safety, choosing duty over personal resentment. This episode underscores the paradox of Reed's loyalty. Even in the face of betrayal, he prioritizes the mission and the welfare of his subordinates over his own feelings. Now, personally, there's nothing wrong with prioritizing objectivity over emotions. In fact, I think it's better, especially in certain working conditions. However, it just goes to show that he is constantly getting betrayed. But the ultimate betrayal came from the NUSA itself. Near the end of the war, the NUSA agreed to a ceasefire with the Arasaka Corporation. And one of Arasaka's conditions? Reed's supposed death. The government, which Reed had served as a zealot, ordered Somi to arrange his assassination to secure peace. Reed had dedicated his life to the institution, and he was left for dead, shot and abandoned by those he had trusted. After surviving this attempt on his life, Reed didn't flee or take vengeance. Instead, he returned to the NUSA, accepting the betrayal as part of his duty. What is it going to take for this guy to realize that he should probably just change careers? It's either that, or the government wants to get rid of him or fire him, but they just don't know how to do it and he just keeps coming back. It's insane. In one of the most heart-wrenching moments in Phantom Liberty, Reed is forced to confront the ultimate test of his loyalty, the choice between following orders or sparing Somi, his protege, from a fate worse than death. Despite their close relationship and the years he spent guiding and protecting her, Reed makes the difficult decision to abide by his duty, allowing Somi to be condemned to a life of manipulation and control. This choice is devastating, not just for what it reveals about Reed's loyalty, but for what it says about his willingness to betray his own sense of compassion. Reed's decision to sacrifice Somi's well-being can be understood through Emil Durkheim's theory of collective consciousness, which suggests that people often feel obligated to uphold the moral codes of their social group, sometimes over their personal values. For Reed, the NUSA represents an authority that defines his moral boundaries, shaping his sense of duty so much so that it often overrides his own instincts. Even when he knows that allowing Somi to suffer is wrong, his loyalty to the NUSA binds him to the institution's demands, creating a tragic paradox. Reed cares deeply for Somi, yet he sacrifices her because of his unwavering commitment to duty. This choice is particularly poignant because Reed is fully aware of its implications. He knows that Somi's fate may be worse than death, that it is likely to be worse than death. What I think is going to happen with Somi is they're going to use Soul Killer to turn her into some digital consciousness or a digital construct, probably using her in the Black Wall, kind of like Alt. And again, Reed is well aware of this. He might not know the specifics of it, but he knows that something akin to this is likely to happen, where she's just going to suffer forever. But he insists on blindly following his ideals and principles. His loyalty has become an unbreakable part of who he is, so ingrained that even his compassion and empathy for others can't shake it. This decision reflects the extent of Reed's psychological struggle, as his commitment to the NUSA drives him to make sacrifices that surpass what anybody should be forced to give. Taking a look at Solomon Reed and Johnny Silverhand side by side, we see two characters who respond to a fractured dystopian world in starkly different ways. While Reed's journey is a reflection of the psychological cost of unwavering loyalty, Johnny Silverhand stands in complete contrast to Reed. Johnny's character is rooted in humanistic psychology, and unlike Reed, who is defined by his allegiance to the NUSA, Johnny is defined by his rejection of all forms of institutional authority. His autonomy is absolute, and he operates by a personal code that values freedom above all else. Johnny's view of loyalty is self-determined, and he's willing to fight against any system that threatens his sense of personal agency. His defiance frees him from the same cognitive dissonance and moral ambiguity that weighs on Reed. Where Reed feels the need to vindicate his actions, Johnny only answers to himself, giving himself a moral clarity that Reed will never experience. The contrast between Reed and Johnny isn't just about loyalty versus rebellion. It's about two fundamentally different approaches to identity, morality, and purpose. Reed's loyalty traps him, shaping his every decision and making him a prisoner of duty, Johnny, despite having his own issues, is liberated and allows himself to live a life defined by a self-determined set of values. Their paths are shaped by opposing philosophies, each character offering a lens through which players can reflect on the nature of loyalty, freedom, and the choices that define who we are. Maybe one day, Reed will allow himself to be free. But that is life when you serve. Just like in this psychological horror game Ad Infinitum, where you play as a German soldier dealing with trauma from World War I. Click this video for my psychoanalysis on that, and like and subscribe on your way out, chooms. Thanks.